The town sat where the river bent like a silver snake. Traders came from distant lands, their carts heavy with spices, silk, and gold. The market square buzzed from dawn to dusk, voices haggling, coins clinking, fortunes changing hands. Everyone knew Darren. He was the richest merchant in town, perhaps in the entire kingdom. His ships carried grain to the capital. His warehouses held more wealth than some nobles possessed. When he walked through the market, people stepped aside. Some bowed. Others simply stared. Today, Darren wore his finest, a coat of crimson silk that shimmered in the sunlight like liquid fire. It had cost more than most families earned in a year. The fabric was imported from the East, stitched by master tailors, lined with fur so soft it felt like touching clouds. He moved through the crowd with his head high, his servants trailing behind, carrying ledgers and coins. Merchants called out to him, hoping for his business. Women whispered behind their hands. Children pointed. Darren did not smile. He did not need to. Power does not require warmth. Wealth does not bow to kindness. But that night, everything would change. That night, winter would teach him something gold could not buy. The sun fell quickly that evening, pulling darkness behind it like a curtain. The market emptied. Lanterns flickered to life. And with the darkness came the cold. Sharp, biting, merciless. Darren's carriage rolled through the narrow streets, its wheels clattering on cobblestones. He sat inside, wrapped in his crimson coat, counting the day's profits by lamplight. Numbers always made him happy. Numbers did not lie or disappoint. The carriage slowed near the bridge. His driver called out, "Someone's blocking the way, sir." Darren frowned and looked out the window. A small figure lay crumpled on the ground, barely visible in the dim light. A child. Ragged clothes hung from his thin frame. His bare feet were black with dirt and cold. "Move him," Darren ordered. Two servants jumped down and grabbed the boy's arms, dragging him aside. The child cried out weakly, "Please, just a coin. I'm so cold." The servants tossed him against the wall like a sack of grain. They climbed back onto the carriage. "All clear, sir." But Darren did not tell the driver to move. Something held him. He stared at the boy, who lay shivering, his arms wrapped around himself, his lips blue. The boy's eyes, wide, desperate, innocent, met his. And something inside Darren, something he thought had died long ago, stirred. "Wait," Darren said. The driver turned, confused. "Sir." Darren opened the carriage door and stepped down. The cold hit him immediately, but he barely noticed. He walked to the boy, who pressed himself against the wall, afraid. "Stand up," Darren said. The boy tried, but his legs buckled. He was too weak from hunger and cold. Darren's jaw tightened. He looked at his servants, who watched with wide eyes, then back at the boy. Without a word, Darren unfastened the silver clasp at his throat. The crimson coat, his pride, his symbol of power, slid from his shoulders. He knelt and draped it over the boy's trembling body. The boy gasped. The coat swallowed him, so large it pooled on the ground. But it was warm, so warm. "Keep it," Darren muttered, embarrassed by his own softness. His cheeks burned, not from cold, but from the strangeness of what he had just done. The boy clutched the coat with shaking hands, tears spilling down his dirty cheeks. "Sir, I'll never forget this. Never." Darren stood quickly, uncomfortable with the gratitude in those eyes. "Go. Find shelter." He climbed back into the carriage, his servants silent with shock. As they rolled away, Darren did not look back. But his chest felt strange, lighter, somehow, warmer. At the edge of the bridge, hidden in shadow, sat an old woman. Her eyes were milky white, blind to the world, but her hearing was sharp. She sold herbs from a basket, though few bought from her. Most thought her mad. She had heard everything. The boy's pleas, the servant's cruelty, the merchant's unexpected mercy. As Darren's carriage passed, she called out in a voice like wind through dry leaves, "The hand that warms another will one day beg for warmth." Darren's driver slowed. "Should we stop, sir?" Darren laughed, though the sound fell hollow. The ravings of a madwoman. "Drive on." Still, he reached into his coin purse and tossed a silver piece out the window. It landed at the old woman's feet with a soft clink. She did not pick it up. She only smiled, a strange, knowing smile. Fate keeps perfect accounts, she whispered to the wind. Every coin spent, every coat given, every mercy shown. The ledger always balances. The carriage disappeared into the night. The boy clutched the crimson coat tighter, warming himself for the first time in weeks. And the old woman sat alone, her sightless eyes turned toward the stars, seeing things others could not. The wheel of fortune had begun to turn. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. Years passed like water flowing beneath the bridge. Darren's fortune grew beyond measure. His ships multiplied. His warehouses expanded. His name was spoken in royal circles. Nobles invited him to their banquets. The king himself acknowledged his contributions to the kingdom's wealth. His mansion rose 3 stories high, built from white stone imported from the southern quarries. Gardens surrounded it, filled with flowers that bloomed year-round thanks to careful tending. Servants moved through marble halls, polishing silver, preparing feasts for guests who came seeking favor. Darren stood on his balcony each morning, looking down at the town that had made him rich. From this height, people looked like ants, small, insignificant, easily crushed. He had forgotten the boy, forgotten the crimson coat, forgotten the cold night when he had knelt on dirty cobblestones and done something foolish, something soft. Mercy was a luxury for those who could afford weakness. Darren could not. Not anymore. When beggars appeared at his gate, he had guards drive them away. When workers asked for higher wages, he reminded them how easily they could be replaced. When rivals fell into debt, he bought their businesses for a fraction of their worth. Business is not charity, he told himself. The world does not reward kindness. It rewards strength. And for a long time, the world proved him right. His wealth grew. His power expanded. Nothing could touch him. Until the storm. The storm came without warning. A violent tempest that tore across the sea, swallowing ships whole. Darren's largest vessel, carrying grain and gold meant for the king's army, vanished beneath black waves. Every sailor, every coin, every promise gone. The loss was catastrophic. The king had paid in advance, expecting delivery within the month. Failure to deliver meant penalties. Investigations. Questions Darren could not afford to answer, because the truth was darker than a storm. The ship had not carried only grain and gold. Darren had added his own cargo, unauthorized goods meant for private trade, hidden beneath official supplies. Profit layered upon profit, greed wrapped in loyalty. Now the ship was gone, and the king's inspectors would come. They would count every missing bag of grain, every lost coin, and they would find discrepancies, numbers that did not match, cargo that should not have been there. Darren paced his study, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. His hands trembled as he pored over ledgers, trying to find a way to hide the truth. I can fix this, he muttered. I can bribe the inspectors. I can rewrite the accounts. I can. But deep down he knew, the ledger always balances. The old woman's words echoed in his mind, though he had long forgotten her face. Fate keeps perfect accounts. As news of the lost ship spread, famine crept into the kingdom. The grain meant for the king's army was gone. Reserves ran low. Prices soared. The poor suffered first. They always did. They came to Darren's gate. Women with hungry children, old men too weak to work, families who had once been proud but now had nothing. They begged for help, for food, for mercy. Darren stood at his window, watching them gather. Their voices rose like a tide, desperate and pleading. Send the guards, he ordered coldly. His chief servant hesitated. Sir, there are so many. Perhaps if we... I said send the guards. The guards marched out with clubs and dogs. They drove the beggars away, shouting threats, striking those who moved too slowly. Children screamed. Women wept. Men cursed Darren's name. From his window, Darren watched without expression. His heart, once stirred by a shivering boy, had grown cold as stone. Mercy feeds no mouths, he told himself. If I give to them, I will have nothing left. They should have worked harder, saved more, planned better. The beggars scattered, limping away, leaving only their curses behind. But curses, like seeds, take root in dark soil. and what is planted in bitterness will one day bloom. That night, Darren could not sleep. He lay in his silk sheets, staring at the ceiling, hearing phantom voices calling his name. 3 days later, royal inspectors arrived. 6 men in the king's colors, their faces grim, their authority absolute. They seized Darren's ledgers. They questioned his servants. They counted every coin in his vaults, every bag of grain in his warehouses. And slowly, methodically, they uncovered the truth. The numbers did not match. The cargo manifests had been altered. Private goods had been mixed with royal shipments. Darren had been stealing from the crown for years, hiding his greed behind loyal smiles and generous gifts. Fraud, the lead inspector declared, his voice echoing through Darren's marble halls. Against the crown itself, Darren fell to his knees. Please, there's been a mistake. I can explain. Explain to the king. They arrested him that night. Servants fled like rats from a sinking ship. Creditors swarmed, seizing property to cover debts. The mansion, the warehouses, the ships, everything was taken. Darren's name, once spoken with respect, became a curse. People spat when they heard it. Former friends pretended they had never known him. The nobles who had dined at his table now refused to acknowledge his existence. Overnight, the richest merchant in town became the most despised prisoner in the kingdom. They threw him into a cell, cold, dark, reeking of mold and human waste. The door slammed shut with a sound like the closing of a tomb. And Darren, for the first time in his life, understood what it meant to have nothing. The cell was small, barely wide enough to lie down. Water dripped from cracks in the stone ceiling, pooling on the floor. Rats scurried in the corners, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. Darren sat with his back against the wall, his fine clothes now torn and filthy. His hands, once soft from counting coins, were scraped and bleeding from the rough stone. His stomach cramped with hunger. He had not eaten in 2 days. Around him, other prisoners moaned and wept. Some had been here for years, their faces hollow, their hope long dead. Darren pulled his tattered sleeves tighter, trying to ward off the cold that seeped into his bones. And suddenly, without warning, a memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. A boy, shivering, blue lips, eyes desperate with cold. A crimson coat, warm and soft, draped over fragile shoulders. I'll never forget, the boy had whispered. Darren's throat tightened. He pressed his palms against his eyes, but tears came anyway, hot, bitter, full of regret. What had happened to that boy? Had he survived? Had the coat kept him warm enough to live through that winter? And what had happened to the man who had given it? When had Darren's heart turned so cold that he could watch children starve at his gate? I was kind once, he whispered to the darkness. I was human. The rats did not answer. The walls did not care. And outside, the world moved on, forgetting he had ever existed. The next morning, the guards came. They unlocked Darren's cell and dragged him to his feet. Move. Where? Darren's voice was hoarse. Your trial. The king has sent a judge. Darren's heart lurched. A trial meant a chance, slim but real. He could plead his case. He could beg for mercy. He could. Don't get your hopes up, the guard muttered. This judge doesn't play favorites. They say he's young but ruthless. Fair, maybe, but not soft. They hauled Darren through dark corridors, up stone stairs, into blinding daylight. He squinted, his eyes unused to sun after days in shadow. The courthouse stood in the center of town, a grand building with high windows and carved pillars. Crowds had gathered outside, eager to see the fallen merchant face justice. Some jeered, others threw rotten fruit. Thief! Let him hang. Justice for the poor. Darren kept his head down, shame burning his cheeks. Inside, the courtroom was silent as a graveyard. Rows of seats filled with nobles, merchants, and common folk. At the front, a high bench waited, empty. The guard shoved Darren into the prisoner's box and locked the gate. A clerk stood. All rise for his honor. Judge of the royal court. The doors opened. Footsteps echoed, and Darren's fate walked into the room. The judge was young, perhaps 30 years old. He wore robes of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the room with the precision of a hawk hunting prey. He moved to the bench with quiet authority and sat, folding his hands before him. The crowd settled. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Darren stared at the judge, something nagging at the back of his mind. There was something familiar about that face. The shape of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, the way his eyes seemed to see through walls. But it was impossible. He had never met this man, never seen him before. Why would a royal judge look familiar to a disgraced merchant? The clerk read the charges. Darren of the Silver Roads, you are accused of fraud against the crown, theft of royal goods, falsification of records, and betrayal of the king's trust. How do you plead? Darren's mouth was dry. Not guilty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed, harsh and mocking. The judge raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. He opened a leather-bound book and studied it for a long moment. Then he looked up, his gaze locking onto Darren's. Before we proceed, the judge said, his voice steady and clear, I have a question for the accused. Darren's throat tightened. Yes, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward slightly. Do you remember, many years ago, giving your coat to a starving boy? The world stopped. Darren's breath caught in his chest. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. The coat, the boy, the cold night. He stared at the judge, his mind racing, trying to connect pieces that did not seem to fit. How could this man know about that? How could? Answer the question, the judge said quietly. Yes. Yes, I remember. The crowd erupted in whispers. Confusion spread like wildfire. What did an old act of charity have to do with fraud? The judge stood slowly and descended from the bench. Every eye followed him. He walked to the prisoner's box, each step measured, deliberate. He stopped directly in front of Darren and removed his gloves, first the left, then the right. On his left wrist, a scar, pale, jagged, the mark of a burn healed long ago. Darren's vision blurred. He knew that scar. He had seen it years ago on a boy's thin wrist, glowing faintly in lamplight. That night, the judge said softly, You saved my life. I was dying. The cold would have taken me before dawn. But your coat, your crimson coat, kept me warm enough to survive. Tears streamed down Darren's face. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, gripping the bars of the box. It's you, he whispered. You're him. The judge nodded. I am. And today, it is I who hold your life in my hands. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, every soul hanging on the edge of a moment that would reshape justice itself. The judge returned to his bench, his face unreadable. Darren remained on his knees, trembling, unable to speak. Let the record show, the judge said, that the accused once performed an act of great kindness. He gave his finest possession to a stranger without hope of reward. The clerk scratched notes furiously. The crowd leaned forward, breathless. But the judge continued, his tone hardening. Kindness in youth does not erase cruelty in age. Mercy given once does not grant immunity from justice. Darren's heart sank. He had hoped, foolishly, desperately, that the boy he saved would save him in return. But the judge's eyes were cold now, his voice like iron. Your Honor, Darren choked out. If I had known you would rise so high, I would have done more. I would have. Stop. The judge's hand slammed onto the bench. The sound echoed like thunder. Do you hear yourself? The judge said, his voice shaking with emotion. You say you would have done more if you had known I would become powerful. That means your kindness was conditional. That means you gave your coat, not out of love, but out of calculation. Darren's face burned with shame. True mercy, the judge said quietly, does not ask for reward. It does not measure worth. It simply gives. The words struck Darren like blows. Each one true. Each one unbearable. I'm sorry, Darren whispered. I became something else. I forgot. Yes, the judge said. You forgot. And now we must decide what justice looks like for a man who saved a life, then spent years destroying others. The trial continued. One by one, witnesses took the stand. A dock worker testified that Darren had refused to pay wages, leaving families starving. A widow spoke of how Darren had seized her late husband's shop for unpaid debts, though the amount owed was less than a single coin in Darren's vault. A farmer told of crops bought at unfair prices, of threats made, of children who went hungry while Darren's warehouses overflowed. Each testimony was a knife, each word a wound. Darren listened, his head bowed, his hands clenched. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, to justify. But what could he say? Every accusation was true. Finally, the judge called a recess. We will reconvene tomorrow for final statements and sentencing. That night, back in his cell, Darren could not sleep. He replayed every moment of the trial, every face of the people he had hurt. He thought of the boy, now a judge, who had kept the memory of one kind act alive for years, while Darren had forgotten it completely. If my coat bought you warmth, Darren whispered into the darkness, then let my punishment buy you peace. I deserve whatever comes. Somewhere above, the judge sat in his chambers, staring at a folded piece of crimson silk, worn, mended, but cherished. The coat that had saved his life. He held a quill in one hand, a parchment in the other. The law demanded death for fraud against the crown. But mercy whispered something else. What should he choose? Justice or compassion? Law or gratitude? The quill trembled in his hand. Morning came too quickly. The courtroom filled again, the tension so thick it felt like breathing water. Every seat was taken. People stood against the walls, pressed together, waiting for the verdict that would define justice itself. Darren was brought in, his chains clinking with each step. He looked smaller now, older, broken. The man who had once walked through markets with his head high now shuffled like a ghost. The judge entered, his face a mask. No one could read his thoughts. Even his advisors looked uncertain. Before I deliver the verdict, the judge said, I must address the court. He stood, his hands resting on the bench. Many have asked me to show no favorite. Ism. They say a judge must be impartial, blind to sentiment. And they are right. Darren's heart sank further. But the judge continued, they also say justice without mercy is cruelty, and law without compassion is tyranny. Hope flickered, small, fragile, terrifying. I have spent days considering this case. I have weighed every testimony, every piece of evidence. I have examined my own heart, searching for bias. The judge's voice grew softer, and I've asked myself, what would I want if our positions were reversed? If I were the one on trial, would I want justice alone? Or would I want someone to remember that I was once human, that I once did something good? The crowd was silent, mesmerized. I have decided, the judge said, that mercy and justice are not enemies. They are partners. And today, I will honor both. He lifted a document, his hand steady now. Let the record show my decision. Darren closed his eyes, preparing for death, preparing to accept what he deserved. The judge began to read. Darren of the Silver Roads, the judge's voice rang clear. You are guilty of fraud, theft, and betrayal. By law, these crimes demand execution. Gasps filled the room. Some nodded grimly. Others looked away, unable to watch. However, the judge continued, I also recognize that you once performed an act of selfless mercy. You gave your coat, your most valuable possession, to a dying child without expectation of reward. He paused, letting the words settle. That act saved my life. It gave me the warmth I needed to survive the night. It gave me hope when I had none. And though you forgot it, I did not. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. Therefore, I am faced with a choice. Do I repay evil with evil, or do I break the cycle? Do I answer cruelty with cruelty, or do I remember that even the worst of us were once capable of good? The judge looked directly at Darren. I choose to remember. I choose to believe that the man who saved me still exists, buried beneath years of greed and hardness. I choose to give him the same chance he once gave me. Tears streamed down Darren's face. He could barely breathe. My verdict, the judge said, lifting his quill, is this: guilty but pardoned. Your life is spared, not because you deserve it, but because mercy does not wait for deserving. It simply gives. The courtroom erupted, some in outrage, others in tears, many in stunned disbelief. The judge signed the parchment with a steady hand. Let mercy repay mercy. As the ink dried on the parchment, something strange happened. A single tear slipped from the judge's eye and fell onto the page, landing directly on the wax seal. For a brief moment, so quick most missed it, the seal seemed to glow, not with ordinary light, but with something deeper, something ancient. The old blind woman from years ago would have recognized it. Fate, acknowledging what had been written. The ledger, balanced at last. The guards moved to release Darren, but the judge raised a hand. Wait, there are conditions. Darren nodded eagerly. Anything at all. You will work to repay every person you wronged, every unpaid wage, every stolen crop, every family you hurt. It will take years, perhaps the rest of your life, but you will do it. Yes, Your Honor, and you will live simply. No mansion, no fine clothes, no servants. You will learn what it means to survive on little, as those you once dismissed must do every day. I understand. The judge's voice softened. And finally, you will remember. Every morning, you will remember the boy you saved. And every night, you will remember why mercy matters more than gold. Darren fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. The judge gestured to the guards. They unlocked the chains. For the first time in weeks, Darren stood as a free man. But freedom, he now understood, was not the absence of chains. It was the presence of purpose. The days that followed were the hardest of Darren's life. He left the courthouse with nothing. No money, no home, no possessions except the torn clothes on his back. People stared as he walked through the streets. Some spit at his feet. Others simply turned away. But Darren did not run. He did not hide. He sought out every person he had wronged. He went to the dock worker first, the one whose wages he had withheld. The man opened his door with suspicion, ready to slam it shut. I'm sorry, Darren said simply. I stole from you. I made your family suffer. I was wrong. The dock worker stared, speechless. I don't have money now, Darren continued. But I will work. I will earn what I owe you, even if it takes years. The man's anger faltered. He saw something in Darren's eyes. Genuine remorse, not manipulation. You'll work in the docks, the man said finally. Hard labor. No special treatment. I wouldn't want any. And so Darren began. He loaded cargo, hauled crates, and mended nets. His hands, once soft, grew calloused and strong. His back ached. His muscles screamed. But he did not complain. He visited the widow next, then the farmer, then dozens of others. One by one, he apologized. One by one, he offered his labor, his time, his life to make amends. Some forgave him. Others spat curses. A few simply closed their doors. But Darren kept going, because he had learned something in that cold cell. Wealth is not what we keep, but what we give that returns. Months passed. Slowly, people began to notice the change. The proud merchant who had once looked down on them now worked beside them. The man who had driven beggars from his gate now shared his meager meals with the hungry. The voice that had once commanded servants now spoke gently, asking for nothing, offering everything. Children, who had once feared him, now ran to greet him. Darren, will you tell us a story? He would sit in the market square, surrounded by little faces, and tell tales, not of wealth and power, but of kindness and second chances. The baker, who had once refused him bread, now left a loaf on his doorstep each morning. The blacksmith, who had cursed his name, now nodded respectfully when they passed. He's different, people whispered. He's humble now. Maybe, others replied. Or maybe he's finally showing who he was always meant to be. One evening, as Darren sat alone in the small room he now rented, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find the judge standing there, dressed simply, without ceremony. Your Honor, Darren said, startled. Just a man tonight, the judge replied. May I come in? Darren stepped aside. The judge entered, looking around the bare room. A single bed, a small table, a candle for light. Nothing more. You've kept your word, the judge said. I'm trying. The judge smiled. That's all any of us can do. He placed something on the table, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Then he turned to leave. Wait, Darren called. What is that? The judge paused at the door. Open it. Darren unwrapped the cloth with trembling hands. Inside lay a coat. Crimson silk, faded but whole. Stitched and mended in a dozen places, the seams showing years of careful repair. But unmistakably, undeniably, the coat he had given away so long ago. His hands shook as he lifted it. The fabric was softer than he remembered, worn smooth by time. He held it to his face, and somehow, impossibly, it still smelled faintly of that winter night. Cold air, desperate hope, unexpected kindness. I kept it, the judge said from the doorway. Every time I wanted to give up, every time life was hard, I would hold this coat and remember that someone once saw me as worth saving. That someone once gave without asking for anything in return. Darren's vision blurred with tears. I don't deserve this. None of us deserve mercy, the judge said softly. That's what makes it mercy. He stepped closer. I mended it many times over the years. Every stitch is a promise I made to myself, to become someone worthy of the gift I was given. And now I return it to you, with the same hope that you will remember who you can be. Darren clutched the coat to his chest, sobbing. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I could change. The judge placed a hand on his shoulder. We all carry both darkness and light. The question is which one we feed. He moved to the door again, then paused. Darren, yes. Keep weaving your new life, one thread at a time. That's how redemption works. Not in grand gestures, but in daily choices to be better than yesterday. And then he was gone, leaving Darren alone with the coat that had saved 2 lives. Once from cold, and once from cruelty. Years passed. The town changed as all things do. New merchants came and went. The market square was repaved. The bridge where Darren had once found a dying boy was rebuilt, stronger and wider than before. But some things remained. Stories, lessons, memories that refused to fade. Darren grew old, his hair turning silver, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from smiling more than frowning. He never became rich again. He never wanted to. He worked as a simple laborer, helping wherever hands were needed. He told stories to children. He shared meals with the lonely. And every winter, when the cold came, he made sure no one in the town went without a warm coat. The crimson coat hung in his small room, carefully preserved. He never wore it again. It had become something more than clothing. It was a reminder, a promise, a prayer. What we give, he would tell the children gathered around him, is not really ours. We're just passing it forward thread by thread, heart to heart. Tell us the story again, they would beg. The story of the coat. And he would, every time, as if it were new, as if the miracle of that night still astonished him. Once, he would begin, there was a proud man who thought gold made him powerful. But one cold night, he learned that the greatest wealth is not what we own, but what we give away. The judge, now older as well, sometimes stood at the back of the crowd, listening, smiling. 2 men, 2 lives, one act of kindness that had echoed across time, changing everything. On the anniversary of that winter night, the town held a festival. It had become tradition. The Feast of the Crimson Coat, they called it. People gathered in the square, sharing food and stories. Musicians played, children danced, and at sunset, everyone would exchange small gifts, not of great value, but given with love. This year, as Darren stood at the edge of the crowd, someone placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find the judge, no longer young, but still sharp-eyed, still kind. Walk with me, the judge said. They walked through familiar streets, past the place where Darren's mansion had once stood, past the bridge where everything had begun. They walked in comfortable silence, 2 old friends who needed no words. Finally, they stopped at a small monument that had been erected years ago, a statue of a man draping a coat over a child's shoulders. Beneath it, an inscription, "Mercy, once given, never dies. It waits in silence until the day it is needed most." Do you ever regret it? The judge asked. The life you lost, Darren thought for a long moment. I regret the man I became, the years I wasted on greed, the people I hurt. But the coat. Darren smiled. The coat? Never. That was the only moment I truly understood what it means to be wealthy. The judge nodded. And do you know what I've learned, standing where I do, seeing what I see? What? that every act of kindness is a stone thrown into water. The ripples spread farther than we can imagine, touching shores we will never see. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "Thank you," the judge said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a coat when I needed warmth. And for teaching me, all these years later, that the man I choose to be matters more than the circumstances I'm born into." Darren's eyes filled with tears. "And thank you for remembering, for seeing the good in me when I had forgotten it existed." They embraced, not as judge and criminal, not as saved and savior, but as two souls who had walked difficult roads and found each other at the crossroads of mercy and justice. As darkness fell, lanterns lit across the town, each one a small flame against the night. And in their glow, the statue seemed almost alive, forever frozen in that moment when everything changed, when pride bent to compassion, when a coat became more than silk. The judge walked away first, disappearing into the crowd. Darren stood alone for a while longer, watching the celebration, listening to laughter that once would have been impossible in a town that had cursed his name. "Fate keeps perfect accounts," he whispered, remembering the old woman's words. "And mercy, when given, always finds its way home." He touched the statue's cold stone, then turned toward his small room, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Because he had learned the greatest truth of all: we are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do after them. Winter returned, as it always does. The cold came swift and sharp, turning breath to mist and puddles to ice. Darren walked through the market one morning, wrapped in a simple woolen coat. Not crimson, not silk, but warm enough. He had learned that warmth comes from more than fine fabric. It comes from purpose, from connection, from living in a way that makes the world a little softer. He saw a young girl huddled against a wall, her lips blue, her small body shaking. No one stopped. People hurried past, heads down, focused on their own concerns. Darren stopped. He knelt beside her, and in her frightened eyes, he saw himself, saw the boy he had once saved, saw the man he had become, saw the endless cycle of suffering and salvation that binds us all. Without hesitation, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Keep it," he said gently. "And when you're warm, when you're safe, remember this moment. Remember that someone saw you, that someone cared." The girl stared at him with wide eyes. "But sir, you'll be cold." Darren smiled. "I've been cold before. I survived, and I learned something from it, that we're all just passing through this world, and the only things that matter are the warmth we give and the love we leave behind." He stood, shivering slightly, and continued through the market. People watched him go, whispering to each other. Some recognized him. Others simply saw an old man who had given his coat to a stranger. By evening, word had spread. By nightfall, the girl had been taken in by a kind family. And by dawn, Darren woke to find 3 new coats hanging on his door. Gifts from people he had once wronged, people who had forgiven him, people who understood what he had been trying to teach all these years. Mercy multiplies. Kindness reproduces. What we give away returns, not always to us, but always to someone who needs it. The judge heard the story, as he heard all stories in the town. He smiled, unsurprised. That evening, he visited Darren one final time. Both men were old now, their bodies worn by years, their faces maps of lives fully lived. "I'm leaving," the judge said. "The king has called me to the capital. A new position, more responsibility." Darren nodded, happy for his friend, but sad to see him go. "You've done so much good here. We did it together." The judge reached into his bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "I've written everything down. Our story, your transformation, the lessons we learned." He handed it to Darren. "When I'm gone, when you're gone, this will remain, so that others can learn what we learned, that mercy is not weakness, that justice without compassion is hollow, that one act of kindness can change everything." Darren held the journal carefully, feeling its weight. What should I do with it? Live it, teach it, pass it on. They sat together in silence, watching the fire flicker in the small hearth. 2 old men who had walked through darkness and found light on the other side. "Do you remember the old woman?" Darren asked suddenly. The blind herbalist who said fate keeps perfect accounts? The judge nodded. I do. I've been thinking about her words. The ledger always balances. I took so much. I hurt so many. But somehow, through this second chance, I was able to give back. Not somehow, the judge said. Through choice. You chose to change. That's what balanced the ledger. Darren touched the crimson coat, now hanging beside his door. A relic, a treasure, a testament. When I die, I want this coat to go to someone who needs it. Not to a museum or a rich collector. To someone cold and forgotten like that boy was. Like I should have remained. The judge gripped his friend's hand. It will be done. They sat until the fire died. Two men who had learned that the measure of a life is not in its wealth or power, but in the warmth it brings to a cold world. Years later, when both men had passed into memory, the town still told their story. In the square, the statue remained. The merchant and the child, frozen in that moment of unexpected mercy. Children played around it. Lovers met beneath it. The old rested in its shadow, remembering. The crimson coat, as Darren had wished, was given to a homeless woman who slept beneath the bridge. She wore it through that winter and survived. The next year, she passed it to a runaway boy who had nowhere to go. He kept it until he found a home, then left it for the next person who needed it. The coat passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation. Each person who wore it learned its story. Each person who received it understood. They were part of something larger than themselves. A chain of mercy that began with one choice on one cold night and would never truly end. The journal the judge had written was kept in the town hall, open for all to read. Teachers brought their students to see it. Parents read from it to their children at bedtime. And on winter evenings, when the cold pressed close and the wind howled through empty streets, people would say to each other, "Give your coat before the cold. For someday, warmth may wear your face." The elders would nod, remembering. The young would listen, learning, because this was not just a story about a merchant and a judge. It was a story about all of us, about the darkness we carry, the light we can choose, the mercy we desperately need and must freely give. Somewhere in the space between earth and stars, two old friends walked together, their work complete, their lesson learned, their legacy woven into the very fabric of the world they left behind. And the ledger, at last, was balanced. Not through punishment, not through revenge, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing mercy when justice would have been easier. The story ends. But mercy, once given, never dies. It waits. It grows. It returns. Always. Moral of the story. Kindness, once given, never dies. It waits in silence until the day it is needed most. Mercy, like fate, always finds its way home. What we give returns, not always to us, but always to the world. Please like, share with your loved ones, and subscribe.